The Incredible Toad of Toad Hall, Part 2. It was winter in the Wild Wood, and the ever-curious Mole had an impulse to go out and explore. However, Mole, not being at all familiar with the layout of the wood, found himself lost and turned about. Fortunately for the now frightened Mole, his dear friend the Water Rat found him.
"Oh, Rat, I've been so frightened you can't think."
You shouldn't really have gone and done it, Mole. I did my best to keep you from it. We riverbankers, we hardly ever come here by ourselves. If we have to come, we come in couples at least. Then we're generally all right. Of course, if you were Badger or Otter, it would be quite another matter.
Surely the brave Mr. Toad wouldn't mind coming here by himself, would he?
Oh, Toad? He wouldn't show his face here alone, not for a whole hatful of golden guineas, Toad wouldn't. But look here, we'll freeze to death if we stand jawing here in the snow. Badger's house is close by. Come help me find it.
They soon found Badger's front door, with the help of Mole banging his poor shin on Badger's door scraper. While the Rat rapped on the door with his stick, the Mole sprang up at the bell pull. They waited patiently for what seemed a very long time, stamping in the snow to keep their feet warm. At last, they heard the sound of slow, shuffling footsteps approaching the door from the inside.
Now, the very next time this happens, I shall be exceedingly angry. Who is it this time, disturbing people on such a night? Speak up!
Oh, Badger, let us in, please. It's me, Rat, and my friend Mole, and we've lost our way in the snow.
What? Ratty? Ratty, my dear little man. Come along in, both of you at once. Why, you must be perished. I never. Lost in the snow, and in the wild wood, too. And at this time of night? Ah, but come in, both of you.
The two animals tumbled over each other in their eagerness to get inside, and heard the door shut behind them with great joy and relief. The Badger, who wore a long dressing gown, carried a flat candlestick in his paw, and had probably been on his way to bed when their summons sounded. He looked kindly down on them, and patted both their heads.
This is not the sort of night for small animals to be out. I'm afraid you've been up to some of your pranks again, Ratty. But come along. Come into the kitchen. There's a first-rate fire in there, and supper and everything.
The kindly Badger sat them down to toast themselves at the fire, and bade them to remove their wet coats and boots, then fetched them dressing gowns and slippers. When at last they were thoroughly toasted, the Badger summoned them to the table for supper. When supper was finished at last, and each animal felt that his skin was now tight, they gathered round the glowing embers of the great wood fire and thought how jolly it was to be sitting up so late. After they had chatted for a time about things in general, the Badger said heartily,
Now then, tell us the news of your part of the world. How's old Toad going on?
Oh, from bad to worse. Another smash-up only last week, and a bad one. You see, he will insist on driving himself, and he's hopelessly incapable. He's convinced he's a heaven-born driver, and nobody can teach him anything. And all the rest follows.
How many has he had?
Smashes or machines? Oh, well, after all, it's the same thing with Toad. This is the 7th. As for the others, you know that coach house of his? Well, it's piled up, literally piled up to the roof, with fragments of motor cars, none of them bigger than your hat. That accounts for the other 6, so far as they can be accounted for.
He's been in the hospital 3 times, and as for the fines he had to pay, it's simply awful to think of.
Yes, and that's part of the trouble. Toad is a hopelessly bad driver, and quite regardless of law and order. Killed or ruined, it's got to be one of the two things, sooner or later. Badger, we're his friends. Oughtn't we to do something?
Now look here. Of course you know that I cannot do anything right now, what with it being winter and all. But when once the year has really turned and the nights are shorter, you and me and our little friend the mole here will take Toad seriously in hand. We'll stand no nonsense whatsoever. We'll bring him back to reason by force, if need be. We'll make him be a sensible Toad.
When the conversation was good and done, the valiant host conducted the two animals to a long room that seemed half bedchamber and half loft, with two little white beds that looked soft and inviting. Mole and the water rat, shaking off their garments in some 30 seconds, tumbled in between the sheets in great joy and contentment. Winter came and went, and soon it was a bright morning in the early part of summer. The river had resumed its wonted banks and its accustomed pace, and a hot sun seemed to be pulling everything green and bushy and spiky up out of the earth towards him as if by strings. The mole and the water rat had been up since dawn, very busy on matters connected with boats and the opening of the boating season, painting and varnishing, mending paddles, repairing cushions, hunting for missing boat hooks, and so on, and were finishing breakfast in their little parlour and eagerly discussing their plans for the day, when a heavy knock sounded at the door.
Bother. See who it is, Mole, like a good chap, since you've finished.
Oh, Ratty, it's Mr. Badger.
The badger strode heavily into the room and stood looking at the two animals with an expression full of seriousness. The rat let his egg spoon fall on the tablecloth and sat open-mouthed.
Oh, Badger, a good fellow, do sit down.
The hour has come.
What hour, Badger?
Whose hour, you should rather say? Why, Toad's hour. The hour of Toad. I said I would take him in hand as soon as the winter was well and over. And I'm going to take him in hand today.
Toad's hour, of course. Hooray! I remember now. We'll teach him to be a sensible Toad.
This very morning, as I learnt last night from a trustworthy source, another new and exceptionally powerful motor car will arrive at Toad Hall on approval or return. At this very moment, perhaps, Toad is busy arraying himself in those singularly hideous contraptions so dear to him, which transform him from a good-looking Toad into an object of pure terror. You two animals will accompany me instantly to Toad Hall, and the work of rescue shall be accomplished.
Right you are. We'll rescue the poor unhappy animal. We'll convert him. He'll be the most converted Toad that ever was before we've done with him.
They set up off the road on their mission of mercy, Badger leading the way. They reached the carriage drive of Toad Hall to find, as Badger had anticipated, a shiny new motor car of great size, painted a bright red, Toad's favorite color, standing in front of the house. As they neared the door, it was flung open, and Mr. Toad, arrayed in goggles, cap, gaiters, and an enormous overcoat, came swaggering down the steps, drawing on his gauntleted gloves.
Hello, come on, you fellows! You're just in time to join me for my jolly... for some jolly... what's the word again?
Take him inside! Now, my good chauffeur, I'm afraid you won't be needed today. Mr. Toad has changed his mind and will not require the car. Please understand that this is final. You needn't wait. Now then, first of all, take that ridiculous driving outfit off.
Shan't! What's the meaning of this gross outrage, I demand an instant explanation.
Take them off then, you two.
They had to lay Toad out on the floor, kicking and calling all sorts of names before they could get to work properly. Then the rat sat on him, and the mole got his motor clothes off him bit by bit, and they stood him up on his legs again. A good deal of his blustering spirit seemed to have evaporated with the removal of his fine panoply. Now that he was merely Toad, and no longer the terror of the highway, he giggled feebly and looked from one to the other appealingly, seeming quite to understand the situation.
You knew it must come to this sooner or later, Toad. You've disregarded all the warnings we've given you. You've gone on squandering the money your father left you, and you're giving us animals a bad name. I'll make one more effort to bring you to reason. You will come with me into the smoking room, and there you will hear some facts about yourself. And we'll see whether or not you come out of the room the same Toad that you went in.
He took Toad firmly by the arm, led him to the smoking room, and closed the door behind them.
That's no good. Talking to Toad'll never cure him. He'll say anything.
Mole and Rat made themselves comfortable in armchairs and waited patiently. Through the closed door they could just hear the long, continuous drone of the badger's voice, rising and falling in waves of oratory, and presently they noticed that the sermon began to be punctuated at intervals by long, drawn sobs, evidently proceeding from Toad, who was a soft-hearted and affectionate fellow, very easily converted, for the time being, to any point of view. After some 3/4 of an hour the door opened, and the badger reappeared, solemnly leading by the paw a very limp and dejected Toad. His skin hung baggily about him, his legs wobbled, and his cheeks were furrowed by the tears so plentifully called forth by the badger's moving discourse.
Now, sit down there, Toad. My friends, I am pleased to inform you that Toad has at last seen the error of his ways. He is truly sorry for his misguided conduct in the past, and he has undertaken to give up to motor cars entirely and forever. I have his solemn promise to that effect.
That is very good news.
Very good news indeed. If only. If only.
Well, now, there's only one more thing to be done. Toad, I want you to solemnly repeat, before your friends here, what you fully admitted to me in the smoking room just now. First, you are sorry for what you've done, and you see the folly of it all.
There was a long, long pause. Toad looked desperately this way and that, while the other animals awaited in grave silence. At last he spoke.
No, I'm not sorry, and it wasn't folly at all. It was simply glorious.
What? You backsliding animal! Didn't you just tell me in there just now that you had given...
Oh, yes, in there. I'd say anything you like in there. You're so eloquent, dear Badger, and so moving and so convincing, and you put all your points so frightfully well that you can do whatever you like with me in there, and you know it. But I've been searching my mind since, and going over things in it, and I've found that I'm not a bit sorry or repentant, really. So it's no earthly good in saying I am, now is it?
Then you don't promise never to touch a motor car again.
Certainly not. On the contrary, I faithfully promise that the very first motor car I see, boop, boop, off I go in it.
I told you so, didn't I?
Very well, then. Since you won't yield to persuasion, we'll try what force can do. I feared it would come to this all along. You've often asked us to come and stay with you, Toad, in this handsome house of yours. Well, now we're going to. When we've converted you to a proper point of view, we may yet quit. But not before. Take him upstairs, you two, and lock him up in his bedroom, while we arrange matters between ourselves.
It's for your own good, Toady, you know. Think what fun we shall all have together, just as we used to, when you've quite got over this painful attack of yours.
It's going to be the tedious business. I've never seen Toad so determined. However, we will see it out. He must never be left an instant unguarded. We shall have to take turns to be with him until the poison has worked itself out of his system.
One fine morning the rat, whose turn it was to go on duty, went upstairs to relieve Badger, whom he found fidgeting to be off and stretching his legs in a long ramble round his wood and down his earth and burrows.
Toad is still in bed. I can't get much out of him anyway. Now, you look out, Rat. When Toad is quiet and submissive and playing at being the hero of a Sunday school prize, then he is at his craftiest. There's sure to be something up. I know him. Well, now I must be off.
Toad, how are you today, old chap?
Thank you so much, dear Ratty. So good of you to inquire. But first, tell me how you are yourself, and the excellent Mole. How's he?
Oh, we're all right. He'll be out till lunchtime, so you and I will spend a pleasant morning together, and I'll do my best to amuse you. Now jump up, there's a good fellow, and don't lie moping there on a fine morning like this.
Dear kind Rat, how little you realize of my condition. How very far I am from jumping up, as you say, now, if ever. But do not trouble about me. I hate being a burden to my friends.
Well, I hope not too. You've been a fine bother to us all this time, and I'm glad to hear it's going to stop. It isn't the trouble we mind, but you're making us miss such an awful lot.
I'm afraid it is the trouble you mind, though. I quite understand it. I am a nuisance, I know.
You are indeed, but I tell you, I'd take any trouble on earth for you if you'd only be a sensible animal.
If I thought that, Ratty, I would beg you, for the last time probably, to step around to the village as quickly as possible. Even now it might be too late. And fetch the doctor. But don't you bother. It's only trouble. And perhaps we may as well let things take their course.
Look here, old man. Of course I'll fetch a doctor to you if you really think you want him. Oh, he must really be bad. I'd better humour him and go. It won't take very long.
He hurried from the room, not forgetting, however, to lock the door carefully behind him. Outside he stopped to consider. The other two were far away, and he had no one to consult. So he ran off to the village on his errand of mercy. The toad, who had hopped lightly out of bed as soon as he heard the key turned in the lock, watched him eagerly from the window till he disappeared down the carriage drive. Then, laughing heartily, he dressed as quickly as possible in the smartest suit he could lay hands on at the moment, filled his pockets with cash, which he took from a small drawer at the dressing-table, and next, knotting the sheets from his bed together and tying one end of the improvised rope around the central mullion of the handsome Tudor window which formed such a feature of his bedroom, he scrambled out, slid lightly to the ground, and, taking the opposite direction to the rat, marched off light-heartedly, whistling a merry tune. He was soon some miles from home. At first he had taken bypaths and crossed many fields, and changed his course several times in case of pursuit. But now, feeling by this time safe from recapture, and the sun smiling brightly on him, and all nature joining in a chorus of approval to the song of self-praise that in his own heart was singing to him, he almost danced along the road in his satisfaction and conceit.
Smart piece of work, that. Brain against brute force, and the brain came out on top. As it's bound to do. Poor old Ratty. My, won't he catch it when Badger gets back? A worthy fellow, Ratty, with many good qualities, but very little intelligence, and absolutely no education. I must take him in hand some day, and see if I can make something of him.
Filled full of conceited thoughts such as these, he strode along, his head in the air, till he reached a little town where the sign of the Red Lion, swinging across the road halfway down the main street, reminded him that he had not breakfasted that day, and that he was exceedingly hungry after his long walk. He marched into the inn, ordered the best luncheon that could be provided at so short a notice, and sat down to eat it in the coffee-room. car stood in the middle of the yard, quite unattended, the stable helps and other hangers-on being all at their dinner. Toad walked slowly round it, inspecting, criticizing, musing deeply.
I wonder if this sort of car starts easily.
Next moment, hardly knowing how it came about, he found he had a hold of the handle and was turning it. As the familiar sound broke forth, the old passion seized on Toad and completely mastered him, body and soul. As if in a dream, he found himself, somehow, seated in the driver's seat. As if in a dream, he pulled the lever and swung the car round the yard and out through the archway. And, as if in a dream, all sense of right and wrong, all fear of obvious consequences, seemed temporarily suspended. He drove as fast as the vehicle would allow, and as the car devoured the street, Toad at his best and highest.
It is I, Toad the Terror, the Traffic Queller, the Lord of the Lone Trail, before whom all must give way or be smitten to nothingness and everlasting night.
He chanted as he flew, and the car responded with sonorous drone. The miles were eaten up under him as he sped on and on.